Let's go ahead and dive into this. We are exploring the Psalms, as Leslie just said. And here's some things that I hope have occurred or are occurring with you as we dig into these or as we have. I hope that you have a renewed interest in the Psalms. Maybe you grew up in a tradition where the Psalms were rather familiar in your life, or maybe it's something you guys or you as a family grew up reading or memorizing. I don't know. But maybe if you've not had an interest in them, I hope you have a renewed interest in being in the Psalms. I hope that there's some familiarity that comes with that. I think the more that you dig into the Psalms, the more that we dig into the Psalms, the more you will find that they are going to be on your lips. And not only are they going to be on your lips, they're going to be in your heart and your mind, and they're going to come out of your mouth. And you're going to find yourselves in situations where the Psalms come in rather handy, if you would. And that includes their rich content, right? What the Psalms are about, what the circumstances are, even though we don't know all of them. Maybe it's their speech patterns. And so you kind of have an idea of why the psalmist is talking like he or she is. But their prayers and their petitions, and they're for our active use. So hopefully you'll become familiar with them, because I think they need to be seen as not fear. They're not meant to be seen as failure or an act of unfaith, but they're meant to be seen as bold. So familiarity, but also hopefully not only will we become familiar with them, but as we do so, may we incorporate them into your daily life. Whether that's when you wake up in the morning, whether that's in the middle of your day, or whether that's before you go to bed or night. But our desire is that you live and experience them. So I'm going to throw a slide up here that we've continued to use, because when we think of the Psalms, we are talking about the human experience. And here's what Eugene Peterson said: everything that a person can possibly feel, experience, and say. Here's what I love about that, because even if you're a student, right, this room is filled with a huge, we're diverse in here from the perspective of age demographics, right? And so even our students can connect with this conversation of feeling and experiencing and saying. This is not just adult material, right? Everything you might possibly experience as a student, as a teenager, you're going to see it in the Psalms, is brought to expression before God in the Psalms. And we have, just as Leslie said, sometimes human life is really filled with satisfying seasons. And maybe you're there. Maybe you are filled with gratitude. Maybe you're filled with joy. Maybe you're filled with delight and goodness, and you are feeling good about God's reliability and His gracious rule. But we also recognize that's not how life always is. And we talked this morning, as Leslie shared some of the news just with the families in this room, and those were some of the things that are taking place in this very room. And if you're listening online, you may have things going on in your life that are unsettling. And we recognize that it's not always neat, tidy, and clean. Our lives are not always categorized by graciousness or gratefulness. We're not always free from distress or trouble or discomfort. It's not always well ordered. And so we say things like this. We say, this is where we are right now. But we also know this is how things are not supposed to be. And Stan just talked about the future that's coming, God's future that's coming. God's future, by the way, that's here now. Not in its entirety. But we are helping bring that about. But there will come a time when these things that are not supposed to be like they are will be remedied. But as the Psalms think about these things, they don't tone things down. And so when they're angry, when they're frustrated, when they have questions, they say these things to God. And so Leslie just mentioned it. We've been looking at how some of these Psalms, or all the Psalms, are categorized. Orientation, disorientation, and new orientation. And that's where we are. And what we find is that your life and my life, if you just pause and think about it for a moment, your life is actually situated in one of these experiences right now as we speak. Or you're moving from one to the other, or out of one into the next. And there's no time limit on these things, right? That's the other thing that's wild. You heard early on when we talked about Psalm 13, and my friend Nate, we did an interview with him, and he's like, I've been living Psalm 13 for most of my life. And that's just kind of been part of his story. And so we find that we don't stay in these seasons of distress and chaos, fortunately. We don't always stay in catastrophe. Brian, I shared 2 weeks ago that one of my favorite things that you say, I'll say, Brian, how are you doing? And you'll say, we're in between crises. Not now. In between, and you flow. If you've lost loved ones, Amy, we love you. You understand what it looks like to be in a place of just unsettledness. and the heartbreak that comes with that. And so we look for those new, refreshing places, and God brings us into this new season of life, and we have these psalms of new orientation. So here's what they look like. We're surprised. I don't know about you, but maybe you wake up one morning or you find yourself in a season wondering, how did we get here? Maybe you're overwhelmed with the new gifts of God, and you have found that joy has finally broken through. I don't know about you, but I haven't seen the sun in like 4 days. And I know it's not near as bad down here as we've had some gross weather, and man, it's messy and flooding, and there's a lot of lives that have been affected and lost. And there's always those times when the clouds break and the sun comes in. And so I think about joy breaking through the despair or darkness. In fact, darkness is turned to light. And so the God who makes things all new provides a new awakening. That's what we're looking at in Psalms of New Orientation. And what we looked at last week is they're transformational. These seasons are transformational. So when you and I move from a season of disorientation to new orientation, we're never the same. We can't possibly be. And so we've experienced something new. And last week we talked about this. God turns our mourning into dancing. That's the way he used the language. In fact, as a result of this new place, you and I today are going to find out that God not only turns our mourning into dancing, but he changes our language. And he puts a new song in our mouth. Bono of U2. Maybe not a name you expected to hear today. Students, you may not remember this. Were you like, who's Bono? Is that what you just said? Okay, I thought maybe like, who is U2? Fair enough. I expected some of that, but I think Bono and U2 are iconic enough in the music world that most of you will know who they are. If you don't, I hope this will spark some renewed interest as well. Bono is the lead singer of the band U2. And this is what he says. Most of you may not know this. Bono is deeply religious. And if you go back and listen to the majority of their songs, you will find things really surprising. In fact, the song Where the Streets Have No Names is about the coming kingdom. All right? Go back and listen to some of their stuff and listen to it, the overtone of his theology in the background. Here's what Bono says about the Psalms. He says they have this rawness, this brutal honesty of whether it's David or not. It doesn't matter. The psalmist is brutally honest about the explosion of joy that he's feeling and the deep sorrow or confusion. And it's that makes or sets the Psalms apart for me. And I often think, God, why isn't church music more like that? This is Bono. I didn't just bring him up just for that quote. But in 1983, that's a long time for some of us, right? Teenagers are like, what's that? That's like, to y'all, that's like 1930 for me, right? You're thinking, that's crazy. 1983. They're recording their album, War. And at 6 a.m., they needed one more song on this album to complete it. And in search for lyrical inspiration, Bono pulls out his Bible. And he turns to the Psalms. And he finds Psalm 40. And Psalm 40 becomes the basis for which 40, the song, is. So 40 debuted live on February 26, 1983 as the final song of every concert that U2 played that whole year. And as they played that song, I want you to imagine this. As they played that song, each member of the band would progressively walk off the stage, Bono being the first. And then one after another, each band member would be off the stage, and the entire crowd was left singing, how long to sing this song? Just out loud. So adapted from Psalm 40, it's a psalm that reaches into the hurt and disappointment and difficulty of being a human being. It's got lots of recognizable language I think that you have heard. Tom, thank you for bringing the psalm to life. Especially like if you see an exclamation point that says, aha, that's the only way to do it, right? And how do you speak about the power of God without maybe yelling it or like raising your arms? And so I can only imagine that even in Hebrew when these things were recited, they were animated. They would have to be. But it brings to life the kind of feelings that we don't often talk about when it comes to this language. And so Psalm 40, your superscription may be a little bit different, but it says this, for the music director, a psalm of David. And I will periodically switch back and forth from the NET to the NIV. But here's what you're going to find out. Oh, go ahead and turn. If you're not in Psalm 40 already, open it up. Pull out your digital device or your iPad or your phone or your T9 texting device. I pulled out a flip phone last night. I was telling Haley and Molly, I think I'm going to go back to a flip phone. And we pulled this flip phone out, and we were like, nah. Texting would be way too hard, and they made fun of me all night about it. But either way, Psalm 40, here you go. What you're going to find as you read this thing is that it just doesn't look quite like some of the other Psalms. In fact, its form is not the standard that we've seen, not even the form that I laid out last week with Psalm 30. But what you're going to find is rather than moving from petition to thanksgiving, the psalm reverses the order and begins with thanksgiving and concludes with petition. And so what happens is this is amazing. Thanksgiving becomes the basis for renewed petition. And I think you're going to find the psalm rather valuable. And we don't really know what the circumstances were for this person. Maybe it was David, and maybe it was, maybe he's recovered from a sickness, maybe he's been ill, or maybe it's something that's happened after victory in battle. We're just not 100% sure. But here's what happens in the psalm. After celebrating, hear the language really carefully, because I want you to think about this for your own life, which is what's going to happen at the end when I suggest a practice. Think about your life right now, whatever season you're in, and look backwards. And think back to all the times that God has delivered you from something, or has walked you through a season and has been with you. And so the psalmist, who once again finds himself in trouble or crisis, asks God to say, if you just do it one more time. You've done it before. If you just do it one more time, I'd appreciate it. And so verses 1 through 3, it's just a new song. So the psalmist reflects on the past, right? When God's answered his prayers for help. And so Yahweh is the one who's delivered. That's the theme you're going to keep seeing in this psalm. It's Yahweh who does these things, not the psalmist, not anyone else. But it's Yahweh who's accomplished what has been taking place. And so early on he says, I relied completely on the Lord. The NIV that Tom read said, I waited patiently. And he turned toward me and heard my cry for help. He lifted me out of the watery pit, out of the slimy mud. You even gave great emphasis to that, Tom. Just this dark place. But then he placed my feet on a rock and gave me secure footing. So waited patiently. Don't hear that as some passive, I'm just twiddling my thumbs, waiting for something to happen. It's rather what Stan just talked about, and it's this intense hope that we know that God, Yahweh, can do this. God has delivered him from death. And I love this. He likens it to standing on slippery ground and slimy mud pits and mire and darkness and isolation. And it's God who has put him on secure ground upon a solid rock. And so he says, he's given me a reason to sing a new song. That's the center of gravity in this. And this new song is a divine gift. It's something he wasn't expecting. Are my kids in here? Just not my kids. My kids are scattered across Middle Tennessee and Arkansas today. Can I have a hands? Kids, just show me where your hands are. I won't make you stand up this morning. Just kids. That means you too, students. Kids, thank you, Chase. Told your dad I wouldn't call you out, but I just did. Got him, Johnny. Kids, here's your phrase. Are you ready for this? I'm going to read it, then I want you to yell it back out loud with me. God gives us a new song that we can sing. Kids, go ahead. I love it. I'm going to read it one more time, then I want you to do it one more time as loud as you can. Kind of like how Tom, with passion. I want y'all to sound like Tom Connor when he's reading Scripture. Put some gusto into it. Feel it. Because it's true. God gives us a new song that we can sing. Kids? Yeah. Tom? Pleased? God gives us a new song that we can sing. He puts new vocabulary in our mouth. He puts new phrases. And we can only say those words because something has happened inside of us that's changed the way that we've talked. So it's a gift. And so we talk differently. Have you ever thought about the way that you talk when you are in a season of distress? And we can sit with people and we can say the things that are alarming and frustrating and hurtful because we can. And then God gives us this new gift, this new song, this new voice. And we have new words. Verses 4 through 5 talk about trust in God. So the psalmist proclaims that those who put their trust in Yahweh will find themselves in a new position, a new place. I love this. It says this: how blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord and does not seek help from the proud or from liars or from false gods. It's not the false gods or people. Just pause for another moment. Think about all the human beings that we put our hope in. Think about politics. Think about the religious world, whatever it may be. Think about all the people that we put our hope in, intense hope in, that are bound to let us down. And he says it's not them that we seek, it's God who we trust. And so it's Yahweh's the one who is able to deliver us. Not false gods, not humans. It's God that preserves his people. Yahweh is the one who's able to deliver the trusting psalmist from the pit. And I love where he goes from here. Verses 6 through 8, he says, you desire obedience. And even though the Torah mandates sacrifices, the psalmist contrasts offering sacrifices with obedience to God. So hear this, because it's going to be something pretty significant. Sacrifices in the end. Please hear me as respectfully as I say this. Sacrifices in the end. And our worship in this room or our worship in other places has no value if our hearts are not in the right place. If we're not living in the way that God has called us to live obediently. And so you have this conversation in verse 6. Sacrifice and offering you did not desire, but my ears you have opened. Burnt offerings and sin offerings you did not require. So if we don't obey God from the heart, it seems like our actions might be a little bit useless. And he's not anti-sacrifice. Don't hear the psalmist saying that, but he urges that obedience to God's ways and his law is the most important thing. And I love this text. Should have had Stan come back here and talk through this, but when he talks about his ears, but my ears you have opened. The Hebrew literally means that you dug the capacity, or you dug my ears out. You gave me capacity to hear so that I can do what you've called me to do and live in such a way that pleases you. And if you're hearing the overtones of this, you're hearing Micah 6:8. He's told you, oh man, what is good. And what does the Lord really want from you? He wants you to carry out justice, to love faithfulness, there's our word chesed again, and live obediently before your God. If you're taking notes in your Bible or somewhere else, don't just put Micah 6:8 there, but the author of Hebrew also quotes this particular text in Hebrew 10, verses 5 through 7. And early Christians who were reading this psalm probably understood already the life and death of Jesus as perfect obedience to the will of God, and could not probably read Psalm 46 through 8 without hearing this or thinking of him. Verses 9 through 10, I proclaim your greatness. I love this too. Tom, you even raised your hands this morning when you're talking about the great assembly, the congregation when it's gathered together. So God has rescued the psalmist from trouble, and he cannot keep the good news to himself. You ever felt that way? When you've got good news or when you've been delivered by something, from something, you make phone calls, right? You text, you send it out, you share it. So sometimes our prayer requests are not prayer requests, but we come and we say, you're not going to believe what's happened. I just want to thank the Lord, thank Yahweh for what has been happening and what has happened. And I can't not do it without coming to the congregation or the great assembly. And so the psalmist invites the entire community to join in the praise. He doesn't keep it to himself, right? It's big enough, it's so big that it's not just about me, but I need to have the whole congregation, the assembly, join in with me. I have not failed to tell about your justice. I spoke about your reliability and deliverance. I have not neglected to tell the great assembly about your loyal love and your faithfulness. I'm going to continue to talk about your hesed, your salvation. And he keeps talking about the righteousness, the faithfulness, the steadfast love, and it bears witness to even who Israel is in these conversations. And so you and I, we proclaim the good news to others. We witness. And then verses 11 through 13, save me. It's kind of this shift back again. You've done all these things, Yahweh. You've done all these things, and I'm in need of help again. And he moves from celebration of past deliverance. Remember, we've been there. It's now, you find yourself back in crisis again, and he says, I need help again. And it's another strong plea for help. And it seems like maybe, if you look at the text, his troubles are external and internal. And they're so strong that the psalmist can't see a way out or see a way forward. He can't see beyond his own problems, and his heart is failing. As a matter of fact, his opponents seek to dishonor him, and that's how he feels. And they're around him gloating and mocking. The language was, aha, aha. And he hopes deliverance will come again like it has before. And so he's saying, God, please don't withhold your mercy from me. Come again. Let your hesed protect me, just like it has in the past. The psalmist has no resources to rescue himself. So that's where he is. Lord, you do not withhold your compassion. May your love and faithfulness continually protect me. That's what he's relying on. Verses 14 through 17, shame on my enemies. So the final request in this prayer is that the wicked experience shame and for God's people to find joy. He says, please be willing, O Lord, to rescue me, O Lord. Hurry and help me. May those who are trying to snatch away my life be totally embarrassed and ashamed. May those who want to harm me be turned back and ashamed. Here's what's also neat. If you want to look at this, if you want a little note on your in your notes there, verses 13 through 17 of Psalm 40 are almost identical to the words of Psalm 70. So if you turn to Psalm 70 is almost identical. It's almost the identical prayer in verses 13 through 17. Maybe the same author, maybe not, we don't know, but it is really powerful. And so what's the main purpose of Psalm 40? It's another model prayer for anyone who's experienced God's deliverance in the past and must rely on it again. I love how the new orientation works on this. He didn't move from here's where I am and you've delivered me. He's like, I celebrate you, you've done this in the past, and here I find myself in trouble again, and I need you again to act as you have before in the past. It's a model prayer for any of us. So the psalm reflects a person who had been in danger of death, had cried to the Lord, was delivered, and found himself responsive to the Lord in a new way, which is that thanksgiving, and based on that, it creates a new petition because there's this reliability in the Lord because he's done it before, had offered witness and his self as thanksgiving instead of burnt offerings or sacrifice, but now in trouble, conscious of failings, appeals in weakness to the Lord for deliverance once again. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you're there right now, and so we ask that same question we've been asking after every psalm. Why is Psalm 40 still relevant in 2024, and in what ways can you and I experience? It goes back to what Stan has already talked about, that you and I as Jesus followers, you and I are reminded of the innocent lamb whose obedience to death replaced all sacrifices. That's why we don't come in here and offer physical sacrifices on this stage with animals. Because his actions took place of all of that once and for all as the perfect sacrifice. So you and I, how does it relate? You and I in 2024 are in the same boat and in the same circumstances the psalmist was when he wrote this. And our prayers should be made of intense hope because the sacrifice for sin has been made once and for all in Jesus Christ. That's the intense hope that we have, not anybody else. And so what's the practice? I would love nothing more if you did this. If you haven't gone back and looked at some of these, last week I encouraged you to go back and create a gratitude list of all the thanksgivings in your life. Extend that, and if you haven't done it, start it. But I want you to sit down with your family or with someone you enjoy, or just by yourself if you need to first, and think about your narrative, almost like a spiritual autobiography. Think about how God has been actively engaged in your life this entire time, and tell the story of God's intervention over and over again, and look back and share it with your family and friends. I don't know where you may be today. Maybe you're in a season of disorientation. Maybe you're in a season of orientation or disorientation. Maybe you have found yourself in new orientation. Maybe you're kind of in this weird place where you're like, I know God's done it before, and I'm in trouble again, and I need him again. So maybe you're here for prayers. Maybe just compassion. Maybe you're just in need of a reminder of God's hesed. Maybe you're interested in this innocent lamb to the point that you're ready to devote your life to him and become a kingdom citizen in that way. And you can place him on in baptism and begin that journey with him as you begin to fill your life with his thoughts and ways and actions and become a follower of Jesus. And you can do that right now as we come and stand and sing.